Ouais, donc c'est intéressant ce que tu dis parce que ça montre, c'est l'importance de se préparer pour dans nos échanges. En fait, ton livre, il nous explique comment on doit réfléchir différemment, comment on doit préparer des questions, mais justement, cette préparation, elle est clé pour qu'on puisse éviter de reposer les mêmes questions tout le temps. Qu'est-ce que tu veux dire par ça? Qu'est-ce que tu veux dire par ça? Qu'est-ce que tu veux dire par ça? Ça peut devenir très répétitif et pas très agréable dans une conversation. Mais j'ai une question quand même, c'est que dans ton livre, est-ce que tu as vraiment les conversations aussi parfaites que ça? Tu dois être une vraie machine.
Mm. Well, all of the conversations in the tactics book and in the street smarts book, which is a kind of a sequel to tactics, all of those conversations that I offer as anecdotes, I actually had. Okay, I didn't make those up. Now, there are some conversations that clearly I make up for the sake of using it as a teaching tool. So I would say this, and then the person might say this, and then I'd ask this question, and they might respond like this. And then I'd ask this question. That is actually more characteristic of the Street Smarts book, which is absolutely filled with sample dialogues. Now,
Mm,
even in that case, some of the sample dialogues I've actually had,
mm,
with people. Other times I'm anticipating a dialogue where an issue would come up, and this is the way that I would prosecute that issue and that conversation. So here are the questions. Here's the first question that I would offer, and this is probably what they're going to answer. So, but even in the Street Smarts books, a lot of those dialogues I've actually had. So these are the kinds of things that have been effective for me to make my point. Now, by the way, effective, just as a point of information, in my view, effective doesn't mean I persuaded the person of my point. Effective means making my point well, giving a solid answer, a legitimate answer, an appropriate answer. Whether or not that answer will be satisfying to someone who's objecting, well, that's an entirely different matter. People who are objecting, I don't know their mental frame of mind, whatever. A lot of them, they're not going to be satisfied with anything. So I'm not trying to encourage people to give, here's the silver bullet, here's the magic. If you say this kind of thing or do this kind of thing, then, they're going to see the truth. No, they often do. This is the best method, I think, to help get people to think most carefully about their challenges and their own worldview. I call it putting a stone in someone's shoe. Okay. I'm just trying to annoy them in a good way, right? I'm getting them to think about things. But whether or not that changes their mind, that's up to God. It's not up to me. That's not my responsibility. I need
Amen.
to respond in a clear fashion. Now, in the examples in the book that are actually anecdotes, in other words, these conversations actually took place. There's a conversation about a witch in Wisconsin in the tactics book, right in the beginning. Okay. And in the Street Smarts, I have a chapter where I have 3 different conversations, and these are all things that took place, all conversations I had. Now, sometimes when conversations go longer, I have to abbreviate the conversations. And so I think I even mentioned this in both the books, that I do abbreviate, so it makes it sound more tidy than it always is. Sometimes they're not so tidy, because that's the way conversations go. But I have to make them tidy for the sake of the book. But I'm accurately representing the substance of the conversation. I'm not changing it to make myself look better. Those are the conversations I actually had. So in many cases, they're just precisely as they took place. But sometimes they look tidier because I had to tighten it up a little bit for the sake of the writing. But to me, it is the case, even though things are sometimes untidy in general conversations, because that's the way conversations are, it doesn't mean we still can't maneuver effectively. And if I don't know of any other way of maneuvering a conversation that is more effective and keeps it most tidy than the tactical approach.